Welcome into another edition of Hand Raised Guys, presented by Comer Heating and Air, Southern Air Conditioning and Heating. I'm Neil McCready. Today on the show, I'm joined by Mickey Plyler, a radio talk show host at 105.5 The Roar in Clemson, South Carolina. We talk about the possibility of the breakup of the ACC. We preview the upcoming season in the SEC and much more. We normally release this on Thursday night. I'm pushing it a day early because of all the talk about Florida State, the Big Ten, possibly getting aggressive with expansion in the wake of the Pac-10, Pac-12 fallout, whatever it is. The Pac-10, whatever it is falling apart tonight as we speak on Tuesday night. So I'm going to push this out a Wednesday night, a day early. So I'll get that out to you today. First, let me tell you about Comer and Southern. They've got different names, but they offer the same people, the same products, the same services. If you live in Oxford, Batesville, Tupelo, or the surrounding area, call Comer. 662-801-1777. If you live in Hernando, Memphis, or the surrounding area, call Southern. 662-429-4429. This will be the Friday. Usually it's the Friday Oxford Exxon podcast. This will be a Thursday morning Oxford Exxon extra podcast. We'll get it to you a day early, like I said. The Oxford Exxon, Highway 6 West in Oxford. Great place to fill up. If you're looking to fill up your vehicle, if you're looking to fill up yourself, great snacks. Always great drink selections, always clean, always a great place to stop in. Don't forget their ribs, the wet ribs, the dry ribs, great way to spend your summer weekend here as we get into the month of August. I'm coming to you from the Clark Ford Studios. 662-257-1900 is the number. Call it. Ask for Corey Clark. Tell Corey what Ford product you're looking for. He'll send you a quote within 15 minutes in business hours. It's right to the bottom line. There's no hassle, no haggle. You get your quote. The rest completely up to you. You can shop your quote around. You can do what I've done, what I recommend that you do, and that's hop into a Clark Ford today. 662-257-1900. Now, here is Mickey Plyler with our ACC preview here on Hand Raised Guys. My old friend Mickey Plyler of The Roar in Clemson, South Carolina, has been doing radio in Clemson for basically a quarter of a century. I used to come on his show all the time when I was the Auburn beat writer at the Mobile Register. Mickey got me in trouble with former Auburn basketball coach Cliff Ellis one day. It was an interesting confrontation that we had where Cliff confronted me in the bowels of Bud Walton Arena in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So we go way back. So Mickey, it's great to see you. Great to talk to you. And how you been?
I'm great. I was hoping you'd forget that. I called him one time the worst to ever a whistle around his neck. He didn't like it. He shouldn't have liked it. He was a better coach than I gave him credit for, and still winning through all that. Man, it's been a long time. I can remember you taught me a lesson one time when you were at Auburn. Tommy Tuberville had open practices, and you begged him to close practice so you wouldn't have to go cover every single practice. I don't know if you remember that or not. I was like, yeah, all right, well, we got to.
It was me.
Nothing worse than.
It was me and Charles Goldberg.
There's nothing worse than I'm sorry. There's nothing worse than week 3 of August camp, 2-a-days back then, right?
Yeah. The funny part of the story was it was a Sunday night, the end of a week, and it was in August, and all the practices have been open. We've been going mornings, evenings, and they would practice the evening practice. They'd start like around 5:30, 6 o'clock, and they'd go till 8. We'd interview people till 9, and back then we're on deadlines, and you're writing as fast as you can, sweaty, gross. You're writing till 10:15, 10:30 to meet your deadline. And Tommy comes back into the media room, and there's like 3 of us in there. I think it was me and Charles Goldberg and maybe Philip Marshall, and we're all sitting in there. We're all on deadline, writing as fast as we can. And Tuberville comes in there and wants to start shooting the breeze. And we're like, dude, you got to get out of here. What? You're killing us right now. Go, leave. And he's like, I don't understand, basically. What are you doing? Well, I was coming back here to talk. We're on deadline. If you'd close some practices, we'd get. He's like, oh, you don't want to be at practice? We're like, well, not every one of them. No, I mean, of course not. And it was the funny thing. And now we flipped the complete opposite thing. You get a few practices at the beginning of the year, and then that's it. And some people want to go to every practice, and I'm like, you really don't, because this, Mickey. It doesn't matter who you're covering. It doesn't matter what practice you're watching. You can be watching Clemson, Auburn, Ole Miss, Pittsburgh, Stanford. It doesn't matter. If you're watching every football practice is essentially the same. It's the same thing, and it's redundancy, especially in preseason camp. It's just the same thing, kind of over and over. Yeah, you'd get it. You'd learn a few things about maybe who was having great practices or whatnot, but anybody who tells you that watching 5 hours of football practice a day is fun, that they're out of their mind. No way.
So last year, I had a friend of mine, Dabo Sweeney, is coach sometimes. We don't get a lot, right? Mr. Positive. So I've got friends of mine that do go to practice every day. And I got a phone call from him, and I forgot what second team offensive lineman. He said, I'm telling you, Dabo's ridden this guy for 3 days, and he's crushed him. And on a Tuesday press conference, somebody asked about second team offensive lineman, and the kid's name was brought up. And my buddy texted me and said, this ought to be interesting. And he goes on and talks about how, man, this kid's awesome, man. We believe in him and everything. My guy's like, no. He has dog cussed him for 3 days. So while we don't get to see what actually happens, it's a good thing too. And you get family time, and you get the same quotes every single week anyway. But you're right, it's redundant. It's boring after a while. The fans probably say, I'd love to be there every day. There's not a man in America who doesn't get paid to be there, big dollars. And how about this? Who would have thought back in those days, we were talking about Senator Tuberville. Well, we're still doing this. And he kind of left us a little bit, didn't
he? Yeah, I would have never thought that Tommy would be a senator. I did know that he liked politics. He used to like to talk politics a little bit, just casually. And he was one of those guys. He was the delegator as a football coach. And so the beginnings of practice, when they're going drills and stuff like that, he always let his assistants coach, and he let his coordinators coordinate. And so he would come, shoot the breeze with media guys. And sometimes he would, if there was a political topic of the day, he would talk about it. I can remember talking Bush versus Gore with Tuberville back in.
Hey, if you want to get in hot water a little bit, we could just do all politics for this podcast, and I can get you in deep trouble. So,
I know you could. And I've done it to myself many times. Oh, this is kind of political, so let's dive into it. I have said for a while, and I'm quasi-educated on it. Probably not nearly as much as you are, because I don't cover the ACC. I don't work in ACC country. I don't keep up with the ACC from a minutia level, because there's no reason for me to. But I've talked to people, and I've heard the same thing pretty consistently, and that is the ACC is held together right now by a grant of rights, a media rights deal. And that is the only thing holding it together. And that there are 4 schools, the schools that I've heard are Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, and Virginia, that know if they could extricate themselves from that rights release, that they would be able to get into the Big Two in some form, whether it's the Big Ten or the SEC. Personally, I think Clemson and Florida State would go to the Big Ten. I think North Carolina and Virginia would go to the ACC, but it really doesn't matter. It's the Big Two, and they're all going to make it's they're 2 power conferences. It is what it is. And I've said for a while, and I'm starting to think that I'm really right, that this is kind of like a game of musical chairs when we were kids. And they play the music, and you're walking around the chairs, and you're eyeing the chairs. There's not enough chairs for everybody. And when the music stops, you either get a chair or you get kicked out of the game. And then they turn the music back on. And I think that they've been playing the music for a little while. And I think Clemson and Florida State, North Carolina and Virginia, and maybe another 1 or 2, but those 4 for sure. I think they are starting to anticipate the music coming to a close, and they're starting to kind of get a little jumpy and jittery. Like, hey, I got to get to a chair. I got to get to a chair. And to the point where I think they're getting ready to break the rules, if you will, of the game. I don't think they're going to wait for the music to stop. I think they're going to jump at a chair. And I don't know that there will or won't be a punishment, but I don't see the scenario where the ACC makes it to the end of the grant of rights. Tell me if I'm crazy.
No, I think you're right. I have said on my radio show that it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And this has been going on, really, this talks for a couple of years now. The Texas-Oklahoma thing started last year with the Southern Cal and UCLA Pac-10. I mean, a Big Ten deal. It did as well. I'm very good friends with athletic director at Clemson, Graham Neff. He's young, but he is as good an athletic director as I've ever been around. I think he's brilliant. I see Clemson's a small town, and much like Oxford, much like Auburn, as you know. And so I know his wife well, I know his kids well. I see him around, and every single time I see Graham Neff, he's got a phone up to his ear, and he'll say, I'll call you later, whatever. He'll speak and give you a handshake or whatever, and he said, I'll call you back. He'll call me when we see each other in public, but he's always on the phone, and I've had a conversation with about it. It's with TV executives, it's with lawyers, it's with conference commissioners, it's with presidents, it's with other athletic directors. He yields a pretty big stick. He's got a pretty good product, obviously, in Clemson, but he also has good relationships with a lot of different people, a lot of different avenues, a lot of different areas. And now it's a big issue. Grant of rights is a $300 to $500 million issue. It is the reason that I am sure that those ADs, along, by the way, let me add Miami, let me add NC State and Virginia Tech.
Okay.
Because there's supposedly 7. I cannot speak. Dan Radakovich is a friend too. And I feel for sure Dan's a mover and a shaker. I feel Dan's been in this conversation. Florida State's been adamant that they have been. Grant's behind the scenes. He's mentioned some things. His comment is always, I'm going to do what's best for Clemson. And, you got to walk that fine line because you're still in the ACC, and you got to walk with their commissioner being called to the principal's office too. But that's his job to take care of Clemson. So anyway, there's a fine line in there of what contractual lawyers, what that litigation looks like. I'll tell you an interesting thing, Neil. One thing that's missing from the grant of rights and the $300 to $400 to $500 million that Florida State and Clemson would owe each is it does not say where the case would be litigated. So imagine if Florida State could get it in the state of Florida, Clemson could get it in the state of South Carolina, or if North Carolina leaves and you get in front of a Tar Heel judge, a Tiger judge, or a Seminole judge, that might have a whole different tone. So we don't know where the case would be heard or each of these suits would be heard. We also, what has been complicated about it is ESPN's been hemorrhaging money. At the same time, Fox has been trying to jump in. Their pregame show at noon has gotten better ratings. They're getting better games. NBC with the Big Ten on a Saturday night, where Notre Dame stands. I mean, there's so many moving parts here. So the latest round of all this was August 15th is a deadline that you have to give them to get out at the end of this academic school year. Well, can he get all his I's dotted and T's crossed? That seems like it's hard to do. So this time next year, is it going to be that year? Is it going to be the following year? I think it's going to take one to jump. I think once that dam breaks, everybody's going to jump. Whatever loophole, whatever contract they can get out of, however they can do it, or negotiate down. You don't want to be in a marriage that's only held together by a prenup. And that's what this is. It's a prenup. Yeah. And the only reason they're staying together is because Clemson doesn't want to be in the ACC anymore. Florida State doesn't want to be in the ACC.
I mean, Florida State's made it pretty clear, right? I mean, like you said, I mean, they're not even hiding it anymore. They're basically wearing the T-shirt that says, "We want a divorce. We want out." Yeah. I mean, I just keep, and I'm with you. Go ahead.
Is that Florida State? I know this. Clemson and Florida State met for over 4 hours last week in Charlotte at the ACC football kickoff. The two schools met, two ADs met on stuff. So the difference is that Graham at Clemson is a little more behind the scenes, and they've kind of almost mutually agreed that Florida State would be the aggressor in the public. But that does not mean that North Carolina doesn't feel the same way as Florida State, that Clemson doesn't feel the same way. Bubba Cunningham at North Carolina is a very good friend. Those guys are all close. The Virginia AD and Graham are very close. But so the point here is that I think there's a lot of like-minded thinking, but they kind of push Florida State as the one, okay, you go say this, you be public about this. You're president, and it might be personality too. I'm not saying it's all contrived that way, but it might be personality that, hey, we'll step out a little bit. We'll make these comments a little bit. Let's see how it goes. If we have to pull back, we can do that. Or if we need you guys to step up. But believe me, I know, man, they are talking to every entity on this very complicated. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Because if you're Clemson, you're there in Clemson, South Carolina. If you're Graham Neff, or if you're one of the people in his inner circle when you're sitting around having a conversation, and at some point someone has to say, The numbers are what the numbers are. And the ACC media rights package is worth what, 28, 30 million a year?
Yeah.
And the SEC media rights package is going to be at least double that. The Big Ten's probably going to be a little bit more than that. And so if you're South Carolina, you have to say, hey, look, the numbers are what they are. If we're making 28 a year and South Carolina's getting 58 a year for the next 12 years, there's that disparity at a minimum. If that's the case, that's 30 times 12 is $360 million at least that in their operating budget that we don't have. Well, that's not competitive. And you're trying to compete. I mean, you're wanting to compete with I just don't think you can. If you're Florida State, it's the same thing. You can't look across the state at Florida and say, well, we're going to compete with them, when in reality, at that point, it's quite possible that you can't when there's that much of a financial disparity. There's a reason the Pittsburgh Pirates don't ever win the National League.
You're a baseball guy. Cubs fan, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
Cubs are over 500 now, right? Or right at 500?
As we record this, they're at 500.
Okay.
Just made a trade for Jamie Candelario. Yeah, we could go down that road, but people would get really frustrated right now.
All right, but it's small market, large market. Now you can say this. So I get my phone calls from Clemson fans that want to stay in the ACC. Hey, we're beating South Carolina every year, and I didn't last year. South Carolina played well in the fourth quarter and beat them. Sure. But we won 8 in a row before that, and we won 2 national championships, played 4 national championships, made the 6 college football playoffs, the second most of anybody out there. Money doesn't matter, but right now that gap is about $20 million. And Clemson, one of the ways they've been able to through their booster club, through the way they allocated their money, they've been very strategic about that. Clemson spends more money than Ohio State on football. Now, Ohio State spends more on golf and tennis and volleyball and basketball and all those things. But so Clemson has to live through the football side of it. That is an easier gap, and it's not easy, but that $20 million gap is one thing. By 2030, it grows to 50 or 60 million between the Big Ten and them, and maybe 40 to 50 million. So that just grows.
That's insurmountable. That becomes too much. You can't close that gap. There's no creative accounting that closes that gap.
About that too, and I can't. This is just. I think we have 2 more steps. I think the power 2, the Big Ten and the SEC. I think that's going to happen. What dominoes fall? The game of risk or monopoly. Who gets what properties? They'll split that up. Eventually, I think we've got to get to a situation where, how is Rutgers and Vanderbilt, no disrespect to some of your maybe listeners on but how can you justify they're making more money than somebody that's not involved in it at this point in time? That's kind of crazy. So I think that eventually we'll redraw the maps. We'll have a czar that will come in. I've always been a proponent of, all right, let's have a football association and let's draw a football map one way. Let's have a basketball association, because you can't leave out Georgetown and St. John's or some of the Villanova or some of those teams, Gonzaga. So let's have a basketball map. It might be regions, and you might be in Region 1 in football and Region 2 in basketball. And so it makes no sense to me that Southern Cal's tennis team is going to get on an airplane and go play Rutgers in a Big Ten tennis match. So let's get it back. The Men's or Women's Tennis Association, Southern California plays Pepperdine. They don't play Minnesota and Rutgers. Clemson right now sends a volleyball team to Syracuse, New York, and Boston, Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts. That makes no sense. I think we'll redraw those lines in the second phase. First phase, when and how, it's fascinating. And I do think one thing I disagree with a lot of people is that they say, Florida State and Clemson. I've been told by good sources that Florida and South Carolina cannot block Florida State and Clemson from the SEC. A&M could not block Texas.
Right.
And dollars are dollars, and that's not blockable. But I don't buy this fact that, South Carolina has the state of South Carolina. You don't need that market. And Florida has the state of Florida. You don't need that market. To me, a lot of that with the cable rights back in the old days and the SEC network. You know what's interesting, Neil? And I need you to do some research for me. Have you ever seen any SEC football network ratings? You ever seen any ratings for the SEC network?
I haven't looked for them yet. I don't know. I would think that their game, their action ratings, if you will, meaning when games are being played, are one thing. And then I don't know how many people actually sit and watch. Nothing against Paul, but
okay, well,
watching Paul Feinbaum's show, for example, or watching SEC Rewind or whatever. I I have reservations about how many people actually watch that stuff.
Last year, Florida and Missouri played on ESPNU. How many viewers would you say? That's a hard question.
Yeah, I wouldn't even begin to know.
Okay.
1.5 million.
433,000.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So my point is, to me, ESPNU and SEC Network, the SEC networks, their inventory is terrible. I think. If I want to watch Vanderbilt play football or Missouri and Kentucky play football, at the same time Alabama's playing LSU, the same time that A&M's playing Auburn, I'm not watching those games. So and there's only one. I mean, there's 2-3 games on at once. It's not great inventory. And now remember this about the Big Ten. See, the Big Ten is going to have Fox. They're doing like the NFL. They have Fox. They're going to have CBS. They're going to have NBC. Yep. They need more inventory. The games that sell. So I looked this up today. Clemson is 10th in the country last year. 2.88 million people per game watched Clemson on TV. 10th in the country. Second behind Notre Dame are the teams that aren't already in the Big Ten and the SEC. The games that people are watching are where Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia and Clemson and Michigan, those teams, when they're on TV, that's who people are watching. And Notre Dame, and those, so you're not paying, the Fox is not paying for Illinois. They're not paying for Northwestern. So what you need is inventory. And so what does, because there's some folks say, well, I'll tell you right now, South Carolina averaged about 922,000 people per broadcast for television broadcast last year. Clemson averaged 2.88. Why would you need Clemson, the 10th rated team in the SEC?
Oh, it's why I think the Big Ten's going to get Clemson, because I think the Big Ten's going to target Clemson. I think the Big Ten's going to target Florida State, because I think, to your point, and we talked about this on my morning podcast earlier in the week, to your point, I think that I think Fox and the Big Ten are a much bigger threat to the SEC than the SEC. Maybe not the SEC itself, because I think Greg Sankey and those people are really smart. I think they know. But the fans, the general fans down here who are, diehard SEC people, and this is not a criticism, by the way. It's just I think it's not completely grasping a couple of things. One, the idea of that. If I understand it correctly, what NBC really wants to do is take that Saturday night game and make it just like what they're doing on Sunday night in the NFL.
Exactly.
The whole, all the bells and whistles, the pregame, the on the field, all the stuff. And to do that, they need big brands. Well, Ohio State's a big brand. Michigan is a big brand. Wisconsin is a pretty big brand, massive alumni base. USC, massive brand. UCLA to some extent. Penn State, big brand. And so if they could add a couple of sort of traditional Southern brands where that the atmosphere pregame at Florida State, at Clemson, is going to be raucous, where Ohio State at Clemson on Saturday night, you can sell that all week long, right?
Yeah.
Penn State at Florida State on a Saturday night, you can sell that. Michigan at Florida State, Ohio State at USC, you go on and on, right? You get those kinds of games. Look, they're gonna pull a big number.
Yeah. So here's what I know about this. I know that, or this is what I've been told. I don't know this. Fox controls the Big Ten, but old CBS, new ABC, ESPN does not control the SEC. That Sankey is the power guy still, whereas the Big Ten has a new commissioner, and it's more like Fox is calling the shots. But Fox seems to be a little more healthy right now than ABC, Disney, ESPN.
Yeah.
With how they are. So I'll ask you this then. So you think Big Ten, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but because that fits into what I think the Big Ten is thinking, what Fox is thinking, maybe Oregon and Washington to solidify West Coast, maybe Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, Virginia, whoever might be an East Coast. But, and I do believe Greg Sankey when he says right now, I don't have any, we're not looking right now at expansion. I believe that. But it seems like to me that the SEC has blocked off the southeastern part of the country, and this is going to be their territory. How does it feel? I'm watching the Russia and Ukraine right now. It's about when they're in the middle of your territory. You feel that Sankey's going to sit back without any kind of fight and let the Big Ten come in Florida State and Clemson, or is he going to put up a fight?
No, I think I don't know this. This is just my semi-educated guess. I think that the SEC, and I'm sure to some degree all of the people at the Big Ten, really want 1 year of new football data.
Yeah.
They want to see what does 2024 look like, right?
Yeah.
Because we know what 2023 is going to roughly look like. It's going to be the same old thing. We're used to it. I mean, we're going to watch it and all that stuff, but everything's pretty predictable.
Right.
You're going to have an ACC race that is what it is, an SEC race. We're going to have East, West. The winners are going to meet in Atlanta, blah, blah, blah. What does it look like in 2024 when there's when you have 16 team leagues, when you have a 12 team playoff, when you have the big Saturday night Big Ten game? What does the SEC look like not on CBS? What do the numbers look like? How do they, like you said, how do they distribute inventory? Do they look at this and go, hey, we're going to have to put a game on Thursday night. Hey, we're going to have to put a game on Friday night. I don't know. And I don't think they know those answers yet. And so these are smart people who they're analytical people. Well, analytical people like to analyze data, and you need the data, and you can project what you think 2024 will look like. But until you have that numbers in, like you said, I mean, in 2024, does the addition of Texas and Oklahoma just by osmosis make the rest of the league exciting? I don't know. Does USC, UCLA make the rest of the Big Ten even more exciting? Does it draw massive West Coast numbers, for example? I don't think people know. And so you got to wait and play that season out. But again, I go back to my musical chairs thing.
Yeah.
Right? Which is you're walking on the periphery of the chairs, and the rules are you have to wait until the music stops. Wait until the music stops. But you're watching Bobby up there, and you're like, Bobby's kind of leaning in towards that chair. And if I follow the rules here, Bobby's going to get that chair, and I'm not going to be on the next round. I'm going to be sitting over there in the bleachers. And so you start going, all right, I'm going to itch in a little. And that's the human nature part of it. So I don't know what happens if, for example, Florida State just goes, pardon my language, but F it. We're out. We don't think this is enforceable. We're willing to take our chances. And quite frankly, the financial difference might be such that it's worth doing.
I can tell you this, and I don't know if you remember it, but we knew it here in the Atlantic Coast Conference. It was even publicized. The ACC, the Big Ten, and the Pac-12 had an alliance. You remember this about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago?
Yeah,
and
it lasted like a week.
Yeah, and maybe the end of it was Southern Cal and UCLA leaving one league in the alliance to go to another league alliance. Like in the end, again, Clemson's Graham now says it best. My job is to do what's best for my university. And I know this, his board of trustees and his president have said, do what it takes for us to be relevant. Now, let me say this too. Another part of it, we hadn't talked about it. It is money. It's 100% money. But I think that Florida State and Clemson and Oregon and Washington and Notre Dame, maybe, Notre Dame thinks a little bit differently, but I could say this, that I'm going to use Clemson as an example because I've talked about it many times. Clemson plays Wake Forest, plays Syracuse, plays Pittsburgh, plays Boston College. And you can be a very talented football team. But you're going to play them at noon. At 3:30, Alabama's playing Texas. At 7:30, Ohio State's playing Southern Cal. In essence, you're playing JV football.
Yeah.
You are looked at as, man, you're the JV game. It's cute and it's nice. But Clemson doesn't want to play JV football. And Florida State don't want to play JV football. They want to play Southern Cal. They want to play Ohio State. They want to play Alabama. They want to play Texas. They want to be with the big boys. And they should be. They belong. Mm-hmm. So somebody either, the hard part is getting past all the contracts and the commissioners giving up their power and how that works, and the networks and their power and whatever contracts that work. Somehow, man, we need to just redraw things. And let's make some common sense, because, again, the idea that Rutgers and UCLA are going to play a conference game, what are we doing, man? That's crazy.
Yeah. Those are the games that are going to look silly, right? UCLA goes to Indiana to play a conference game. It's going to look odd.
And that's football, Neil. That's not volleyball, which they're going to do that too.
Yeah. Well, they're already coming up with, trying to come up with ways. I was reading about this today when the Big Ten when the Midwestern schools go out west, partner them up where they can fly together and go, one plays USC, one plays UCLA, and they switch and then fly back and all that stuff. They're already coming up with, hey, are there ways to sort of cut some cost here? And in other words, they're already realizing that in all the other sports, it's a pain in the ass.
I know this. I know that the travel's going to be bad. But I was talking to an Olympic sports coach at Clemson the other day, and he was asking me, "Hey, are we going Big Ten? Are we going SEC?" And I said, my patent answer is Clemson will leave the SEC. I don't know when, I don't know how, and I don't know the landing spot, but they're going to leave. And I said, "What do you think about that?" And he said, "Well, I think it's great." I said, "What's the number one thing is my salary doubles." He said, "Look at the coaches in my sport in those leagues." And that's where, look, you want to talk about the SEC money? Yeah, Georgia's won two, and Alabama's won some, and LSU. But, Clemson's won some, and Ohio State. They can challenge those kind of things. Look what the SEC basketball has done. When you and I were doing shows 10 years ago,
yeah.
Bruce Pearl wasn't at Auburn, and A&M, I think they're going to win big there. I mean, obviously it was Kentucky. Florida had a little run in there. But, I mean, what Rick Barnes has done, what Arkansas is doing, and they're paying big-time salaries and making major renovations, these coliseums, and it's happening in golf. I've got friends of mine that are golf coaches. My cousin's a golf coach at Kansas, and she says at Kansas, we don't fly on jets to tournaments. SEC schools and Big Ten schools, they fly their own jets to these tournaments, and they fly first class, or they stay in these accommodations. That's where it's going to make a difference too. Look at the Olympic sports and what they're doing right now, and the SEC is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, Ole Miss just hired Chris Beard. I mean, they're
crazy, right?
Yeah, it's wild to see the level of financial commitment to all sports. Really, I mean, they're Ole Miss is paying its women's basketball coach more than $1 million a year. I would have never guessed that would happen.
But that's where the money. I mean, when you have it, it's obviously going to go to football first, and it should. But it gives you an awful lot of luxuries. We talk baseball. It's the difference when, the A's can win occasionally under Moneyball. The Rays can win some, but they make one trade deadline mistake. They get one injury. The bigger market clubs can afford to make bad mistakes, and if they'll just cover it up. And so you want to write a check? Okay, if we hired a bad guy in the SEC and the Big Ten, we'll write a check. We'll get rid of him. Small markets, smaller teams and smaller conferences, they can't do that. They can't write that off as much.
Oh, it's just the great example in baseball is the New York Mets. They made some mistakes, and they're kind of eating them at the deadline now. And they'll, as we record this, the deadline's like 20 minutes away, and they're eating some contracts, and they're going to reset for a year, and they'll go back and buy big name players and try again. But
the margin for error is so much easier it is at Alabama than it would be at a school, a non P2 when it's all said and done school.
All right, so let's talk about at least one more season with the ACC as currently composed. It certainly looks like Clemson's the favorite. It looks like there's a lot of respect for Mike Norvell and Florida State and what they've done. And then after that, it's kind of unknown. North Carolina a little bit. NC State gets a little respect, but the meat of the league is up top with those two schools, Clemson and Florida State, kind of same as it's always been, really.
Well, let me say this. So remember when Bill Hancock, he comes on our station on our afternoon show a lot. And remember he was telling us how, oh man, it's only BCS. That's the only way to do it. And then we got a playoff, and it's like, oh well, I mean, 14 playoffs, the only way to do it. Now we're going 12. So forever, remember when you had to have divisions and you had to have a championship game out of those divisions. That's the only way to do it. And now it's the idea is the ACC doesn't have divisions this year. They didn't have it during the COVID year. Notre Dame came in for 1 year, which is crazy. And Clemson and Notre Dame played in the ACC championship game, and Clemson blew them off the field that day. After losing to them when Trevor Lawrence had COVID up in South Bend in double overtime. But this is the second time that we don't have divisions. So Clemson and Florida State play in September. And conventional wisdom tells us that they'll play again in December. And obviously the December game will be worth a lot more than the September game. They play in Clemson in September. And that game's important, but not as important as how those teams progress after that, because the winner of the December game wins the conference and has a much better stance as far as the college football playoff. You're right, though. I think that Florida State's made progress. Mike Norvell, and through transfer portal, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, Neil, but it's something like 22 of their top 44 are transfer guys. I think it's like 8 on offense and like 9 on defense, transfer guys. And they've gone to transfer portal, which is good in one way, but you better win, because if not, then you got some pressure there. Clemson had quarterback issues the last 2 years. They had not had special teams the last 2 years. And they made the college football playoff 6 straight years. They hadn't made the last 2. They had issues. They had issues with Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson too, but those guys made up for it. And I made the statement that had Bryce Young been the quarterback at Clemson, they'd gone to playoffs the last 2 years. They've had quarterback issues. Quarterback didn't play well. Garrett Riley comes in from TCU's offensive coordinator. The hope is that Cade Klubnik plays better, and the hope is that Clemson football they still have weaknesses, still have question marks, but those can be covered up by a little better quarterback play. But yeah, I think those are the two. I would put those two at the top tier, and then to me, there's a little drop off, and there's 5 or 6 teams in that middle part.
Who's in the middle part? North Carolina and
North Carolina has Drake May, extremely talented. They're going to miss their leading receiver Caleb Downs from last year, or Josh Downs, Caleb's brother, Josh Downs. They've got a new offensive coordinator, Pete Limbo. Guy left to go to Wisconsin with the new staff there.
Oh yeah, I should know this because he coached at Ole Miss for a while, and it's been the running joke, and now his name's escaping my oh my God, that drives me crazy.
I'll think of it right now in a minute. But with that said, so the new offensive coordinator. Here's the thing about the Tar Heels, Neil. The defense has been atrocious. And Gene Chizik and whoever else is running up there, the guy from Army a couple of years ago, they've been really bad on defense.
Phil Longo, by the way. I don't know.
Longo.
I couldn't think of that either. Phil Longo.
Yeah. Pass happy. It'll be interesting to see what Luke Fickell does at Wisconsin with him. I think Wisconsin's going to be good this year, by the way. With that said, Tar Heels have holes. Can they run the ball better post Longo? I think they can. Drake May is a good athlete. He'll be a first-round draft pick. Defense is the issue there. A lot of people like Pittsburgh. Neil, let me ask this question to you. Name the teams that are in Power 5 conferences that have won more football games than Pittsburgh the last 2 years.
Teams in Power 5 conferences that have won more games than Pittsburgh the last 2 years?
Yes.
Georgia, obviously. Ohio State. Michigan. Alabama. How many more am I missing?
Clemson.
Okay.
That's it. 5. Pittsburgh's won 20 games the last 2 years. Only 5 teams in the country have won more games than Pittsburgh the last 2 years. They lost a lot of personnel on defense. They've got a transfer, situation at quarterback, running back. Pat Narduzzi's teams play really good defense. Schedule is somewhat favorable for them. The easiest schedule in the ACC is Louisville. Louisville does not play Clemson. They don't play Florida State. They don't play North Carolina. And, Notre Dame has a little deal in it. They don't play Notre Dame either. So Louisville has a very easy schedule. The toughest schedule is Duke. You're going to laugh at when I tell you this. Duke's a good football team. They won 9 games last year. Didn't really beat anybody. Riley Leonard is an NFL quarterback. They've got 10 returning starters on offense and 9 on defense. They're talented, but their schedule, they have Clemson and North Carolina and Florida State and Notre Dame. So they'll beat one of those teams, but they'll be better this year. It's a good, solid team there. NC State lost a little bit. NC State was in top 10 at one point in time last year. They lost a little bit. They've got the quarterback for Virginia, Armstrong. Brendan Armstrong's transferring in with his old offensive coordinator. You'll see Leary in the SEC from NC State last year. He'll do a good job in Kentucky. Those are the teams there. Wake Forest, the quarterback leaves to go to Notre Dame. He was great, but I think the bigger deal is A.T. Perry, wide receiver, graduated. Still got a good wide receiver core. Dave Clawson does a great job with nothing at Wake Forest. They're a solid club in there.
People laugh at me because we do the Clark Lee joke because Clark Lee's bald-headed like I am, and so we do the joke about Clark Lee. But I actually think that's a winnable game for Vanderbilt at Wake.
Oh, they can win that game. Vanderbilt played better last year, right?
They were better, and I think Vanderbilt's path to 6 wins has to include a win at Wake, and if they get it, then they could overachieve a little.
Yeah, Miami is one. Mario Cristobal. If the ACC is going to live to their potential, you got to get Virginia Tech back. Brent Pry has a tough job. I'm not sure what's going to happen there, but you got to get Virginia Tech back.
How have they fallen off like they have, where they went from being a national power to really being a borderline bad football team the last?
They're bad. I'll give you this: if they have a losing season this year, it's the first time since the late 40s and early 50s they had 4 straight losing seasons. How did it happen? Beamer fell asleep at the wheel at the end of his tenure. they weren't as good at the end. A little bit of Bobby Bowden kind of a deal, Joe Paterno kind of deal, that it was bad at the end a little bit. And man, I really felt like that the next guy from Memphis, I thought he was going to do a good job there. His first year, they went to the ACC championship game, and I went up there. I heard his post game show, and man, they were loving him. He's a little bit like, I'm going to get in trouble here. He's a little bit like Beta O'Rourke, and the more you see of him, the more he exposes. He's got tons of weaknesses, right? Because a lot of these guys, oh man, I'm going crazy now. Guy that was at Texas, or was at Houston as well. I'm going crazy now.
Major Applewhite?
No. Was it Ohio State? I'm going crazy. Houston, Texas just fired him before.
Herman.
Yeah, Herman. Herman is Beta O'Rourke, right? Like, man, on the surface, you get him and everything's going to be great. And he can fool you for a little bit. He fooled people at Houston for a little bit. But in the end, he was a weird dude, and it didn't work out. I think that's what Virginia Tech did. Now, Pry, I don't know a whole lot about. I hear good things. But you know how hard it is to turn around. You've seen it. Once it goes down, man, upper mobility is tough. And a little bit of administration stuff, a little bit of facility stuff. Miami's kind of been the same way. Radakovich, the AD, would do a good job there. I think Cristobal's a great recruiter. Neil, I think Mario Cristobal's a terrible game day coach.
You're not the first person to say that he's a really good recruiter. He's a really good culture builder, but that he struggles on game day and that he has a hard time kind of owning that part of it. And, I watched them a good bit last year because I was curious. I've watched them a good bit the last 2 years because 2 years ago, I thought there was a chance that Kiffin would be in the mix for that job. And then last year, I just kind of out of curiosity, and they just were not a very good team. People kept talking about them beating Texas A&M, and they just weren't good enough to do it. It wasn't A&M was any good.
And then Middle Tennessee State, my friend Rick Soxton went down there and just kicked him in the teeth on short yardage. They stuffed everything, if you remember that game, and gave up 99-yard touchdown run and all that. It was a wild one. But they've not been very good on lines of scrimmage. You think about this. When Miami came into the league, they were the best team in the country. And when Virginia Tech came into the league, they were a top 10 team. And Boston College and they had it rolling. So, I don't know why, but all those teams fell off. Florida State fell off. Quarterback, coach combination, administration a little bit through all those. Probably at Virginia Tech through some of those. But, the ACC had potential. And that's why, football at Virginia Tech is really important. I've been in Lane Stadium 10 times, 12 times in my life. Well, it was a pit, brother. You didn't want to go in there. And, man, they were down your throat on a night game, and they kicked you right. And, they wanted to destroy you, and they did a great job of it. Now, once it gets going the other way, it's just hard to stop that momentum. And I'm not sure if he's a guy who can do it or not.
Yeah, there's just so many programs in that league. Like you mentioned, Syracuse and Boston College, and they're fine, but there's just, it's so sometimes, not to get back to the genesis of our conversation too much, but not to beat it to death, but it's hard for me to believe that Clemson people, that Florida State people, that I'm sure they can talk themselves into, hey, we're getting excited about Boston College coming to town. But at the same time, it's just difficult for me to believe that that gets the adrenaline pumping all that much.
They don't look like us. We don't look like them. We don't talk like them. Here's where they were sold to Billy Goods, because I went to Chestnut Hill 3 or 4 times. And Fenway Park's nice. You get to go to game, and you get some good seafood, and you get some nice tours. But how many times can you do that? Syracuse is a pretty place, not the city, but the surrounding areas.
Yeah.
2 or 3 times of that. You go to Cooperstown once, you go to Niagara Falls once, you go to Buffalo, whatever. After a while, there's got to be more to it. So in the end, here's what's killed the ACC. It's small, private schools that had basketball identities. They struck out, and now they've got northern, small private schools that can't compete with the bigger southern state universities. Their identity in their DNA. North Carolina's football. North Carolina's basketball. Syracuse's basketball. For Virginia, Georgia Tech, these are basketball places. NC State, Wake Forest, Duke. That's basketball. And if 80% of the television contracts coming from football, then they're stuck. And that's why Clemson and Florida State, they're out, man. They have. It's a divorce. There's no like-minded thinking anymore. They want out. They want out of the marriage.
Where does Clemson want to go? SEC or Big Ten? If I were to poll 100 rational Clemson people, where do they want to go?
I'm not sure there's 100 rational college football fans in any fan base. I know this. If you polled Eric Backets, their baseball coach, he would say SEC because he coached in the Big Ten at Michigan. And there's an advantage to recruiting down here. You're not making a baseball decision here.
No, of course.
I think if you ask most Clemson fans, they'd love to go to Neyland, and they'd love to go to the Swamp. They've got a series signed up. Clemson's played Auburn about 5 or 6 times. They've played 4 so far with Texas A&M. I think that's right. Yeah, 4 so far with Texas A&M. They've got a series with LSU coming up. Georgia, they play not enough, but those games have been great and fun, and they like it when those teams come over here. Auburn's been over here, a couple of times. It's fun. I think the average Clemson fan would rather drive to Auburn and drive to Tuscaloosa and drive to Athens and Knoxville and Gainesville than fly to Bloomington or fly to Champaign, Illinois. Now, that said, there's something sexy about a Southern Cal, an Ohio State, a Michigan, and a Penn State. And having those guys here would be great. But again, your DNA of who you are, Clemson's an SEC school. Florida State's an SEC school. And it just fits who they are a little bit more. That's their neighbors, man. That's their water cooler talk. That's who they are. And to me, if you could draw it up, that'd be the way to go.
Speaking of SEC schools, as I get ready to let you go, what have your impressions been of the job that Shane Beamer has done at South Carolina?
He completely turned things around the last 2 games last year. And even the bowl game, because I thought they played Notre Dame, I was skeptical. And then they crushed Tennessee and they crushed Clemson. The week after, Florida destroyed them in the Swamp, right? So after that game in Gainesville, I'm like, man, I don't know about this kid. He's a lot like Dabo Swinney. He's a cheerleader guy. He's a guy that's a CEO guy. Very positive message. He got a big 5-star commitment today over Ohio State, a big defensive end. They feel good about that. I think he's recruiting okay. He's a very likable guy. He's got I think a pretty good staff. A lot will depend on Darryl Loggins, his offensive coordinator, how that works. I don't think they're going to be very good on lines of scrimmage this year. And he's like everybody else, man. He's 1 win away from getting over the top, and he's 1 loss away from getting down. And I think it's going to be that way for a long time. Tommy West is a dear friend of mine. Tommy those years. It's like, man, there's so many times you look back at him, he was that close to making it. And then it was always 1 step forward, 2 steps back at Clemson. Or, everybody, that. You've seen all those guys that you've been around at Auburn and at Ole Miss, those guys. Man, it's 1 or 2 pivotal games. And so South Carolina fans are hoping that it's Tennessee and Clemson last year. Because, man, he beat 2 top 5 teams back-to-back weeks last year.
Oh, it felt like such momentum at the time. I mean, it was like, man, here they come. I mean, that scene in, I guess, in Columbia when they beat Tennessee, and then I think it was at Clemson when they beat Clemson, you could just see it. I mean, there was a lot of energy around that program and inside.
And now, so they open up with North Carolina in Charlotte, and then they've got Georgia in week 4. So right now, man, they love him, and I think he can do it. I really think he can get it done. But if we do this again on October 1st, and he loses to North Carolina, and he gets blown out by Georgia, they're going to be down his throat again. That's what he's like. So many coaches. He's 1 close win and 1 close loss away from being it.
Dabo going to stay at Clemson for good? If Alabama opens, is he bolting, or is that ship sailed?
A couple of things about Dabo. I could open my window right here. He lives in the neighborhood behind me. Now, to be clear, Neil, we need to put railroad tracks from his neighborhood in mine, because that's a whole nother. The man's got him about a 40,000 square foot house and the basketball court and all that over there. Anyway, his wine cellar is bigger than my house. With that said, an assistant coach of his told me this about 5 years ago. I said, would he ever go? And he goes, no. I think he'd go to the NFL maybe if they would have him, but I don't know. He said, do this. Name the successful coaches at Alabama. And I said, Bear Bryant. I said, Gene Stallings. I'm not going back to the days before Bear, but I saw Bear Bryant coach, and Gene Stallings and Nick Saban. And he goes, all those guys are stoic, reserved personalities that were, total in charge of everything. The idea that Dabo would go dance in the locker rooms and come up with all his little sayings, his corny little things he does. I will tell you this, Neil, he's authentic, man. I know a lot of people don't like him. He's that goofy, but he's that authentic in what he is. He's an unbelievable guy. If you he would have to change who he is to go be a little more Alabama-like, and I don't think he would do that. Or Alabama would change who they are, and goodness gracious, they aren't going to do that. So I doubt very seriously that he ever coaches anywhere other than here.
I tend to agree with you. I don't think he would do it. I think
on the other side though, man, why would you with NIL and transfer portal? Mike Krzyzewski's gone, and Gary. You think about Roy Williams. Roy Williams mentioned it's a hard deal to do here. Why would you stay around and have to put up with all that? Why not go to the NFL? Why not retire? Why not go play golf and fish instead of putting up with all that? You got your quarterback making more than your quarterback coach.
I heard a story today. I will leave the player. It's for anybody listening. It does not involve Ole Miss. I heard a number today. A player likely to commit to an SEC school soon. It's a 3-year commitment worth $2.1 million. Now, good for the kid. But when you pay $700,000 a year for a freshman to come in and play in your program, you are upsetting the apple cart inside the locker room. If he lives up to the contract, my God, he must be a great player, which means you're going to have to pay more to get him. The contract's going to change. And if he doesn't, you threw the money away, and now you got to figure out how you extricate yourself from that and still be able to recruit the next guy. It's a problematic system. It's not like a baseball player who gets $22 million a year and he signs the deal, and that's the deal. And look, if he overperforms, he doesn't get to renegotiate the deal. He's $22 million, and if he underperforms, that's on the front office, and they get fired.
It's all player, and it's a player option. There's no club option.
Right.
And on top of that, so why would that kid go to this school, get the front end of it, have a great freshman season? Why would he not go in a transfer portal to renegotiate his deal? Because somebody out there, if he's as good as he said, then somebody out there is going to go 2.1. We'll go 3.1.
Of course.
I mean, the Addison kid left Pittsburgh last year for a couple of $1 million to go to Southern Cal, and he's a first-round draft pick and all that. Yeah. But the fact is, that's the only reason he left. So why would you not go in a transfer portal to test your market? Why not be Caleb Williams? Find out.
Of course. Yeah, exactly. And then, because
originally
if you're that good, right? If you're that good, you cash out, you get the money, and then a year later, you go to the NFL. I mean,
originally I thought that the reason I was against the transfer portal is I thought, okay, somebody from Troy is going to have, as a true freshman, had 80 catches for 900 yards and 14 touchdowns, and a car dealer in Tuscaloosa or in Auburn is going to say, hey, man, I'm going to give you $150,000 to come play here. And I thought, man, that would be terrible for Troy to recruit this kid, take a risk on this kid, and developing him, and then he's going to go star in-state somewhere else. But it's not at Troy. Caleb Williams left Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't Troy.
We underestimated, for whatever reason, just how much this stuff means to people. Huh. For whatever reason, even people like you and me, I guess I did. I knew the whole NIL thing was going to be a joke. I was like, this is not going to be about selling some jerseys or they're going to get salary. But I didn't know that it would escalate to this. Now, look, we're just getting to the beginning of this, where the highly paid freshman gets the money, and then we see what happens. We're just now getting there. So the backlash from that hasn't had a time to completely come around.
Yeah. I made a statement on my show before. You and I, we're not millionaires. We don't make money. We're not billionaires, certainly. The idea, even if I was a billionaire, you think I'm taking money from my 4-year-old or my upcoming little daughter I got to give to a high school football player?
No
Man,
way.
Have you lost your mind?
No way.
There's no way on earth.
No way.
But if more people have more money than sense sometimes, and look, I grew up in the '80s, and I can remember some stories of the Texas and Texas A&M oil people, and these people got money, man. And I'll tell you what, my next door neighbor here in Clemson was an engineering professor. His dean left Clemson to go to A&M. He said one day they had this new engineering building. It was $83 million. They started a campaign for it. They started at 8 o'clock one morning with a goal of 83 million. They had the money raised by 3 o'clock. 3 people made phone calls, and that was it. There's money out there, and these people, A&M is so starved that you go and just buy football players. They're so tired of not winning that you go buy football players. And so I'm gonna get in trouble for saying it for here, but like when Auburn hires Hugh Freeze, what you're saying is we don't have enough confidence to go win with a good dude. We're gonna go win with a guy that did what he did at Ole Miss, and you might feel differently about him from his Ole Miss days to all that, or a Rick Pitino. St. John's has said we don't have enough confidence. We have to do it this way. We're going to hire Rick Pitino. We can't do it the right way. Miami has said we can't win in football. John Ruiz is going to be a billionaire. Is going to have to give all these players this money. But those are avenues people can take now. And there's people have money, man, and they are crazy about it. But I grew up in a time where I knew this was going to happen. You think in Columbus, Ohio, that a car dealer doesn't think he can make an impact? Look at what these guys are driving now. I mean, these guys got more money than sense, man. So it's going to get worse. Yeah. But here's I'll come full circle on this. You make them employees. I would have never believed that. Why would you make someone an employee? Because then you got to non-compete for a year. You make them sit out a year. You have more control if they're employees. We've lost control, right?
Yeah, I've had this conversation. Andy Staples and I had this conversation pretty recently about this whole thing. I have real questions about how the employee thing works on down the chain, right? If you're with the football player as an employee, what about the volleyball player? How does all that work? And I know people say there's ways to do it. I just think it's complicated. And then what I hear from the league, and it's interesting. I don't know whether this is the league's conference offices trying to hang on to the way it's always been because this is power, or whether they have looked at this analytically and say, I don't know. They are very cynical / skeptical about whether that works.
I think the Big Ten I think they're more in favor of that than the SEC at this point. And if that is the case, then we'll have to see how all that works.
Yeah,
I don't really
can't speak to the Big Ten. I don't think the SEC is crazy about the idea just yet. I don't think they're. I think there's concern at their level about how viable it is.
Will you grant me this at least?
Sure.
That it's not just the portal and not just the NIL, but the combination is what's so deadly.
Yeah.
And we could find a way to mitigate a little bit of the NIL if we made them sit out a year with the portal.
Yeah, I do a show twice a week with Tyler Siskey, the former he was Alabama's personnel director. He was Ole Miss's recruiting director. He was a wide receivers coach at South Alabama. And he is a staunch advocate for going back to the old transfer rules.
Yes, 100%.
But and while I know that's the right thing to do and it makes a ton of sense, I don't know that anybody we are in an environment right now that is incredibly pro player for the player. And you're taking the toothpaste and trying to get it back into the tube. And that is hard to do. I mean, go try.
They're scared of litigation. You know, Justin Fields.
Yeah, because they'll probably lose in litigation if you get the wrong judge. It's why the NCAA has quit fighting in many ways. It's because the NCAA found they were losing in court.
All right. I know you got to go. I know you got that going on. Give me 30 seconds then. I'm going to interview here. Am I wrong? Have I misread Hugh Freeze at Auburn? Would you have hired Hugh Freeze if you're Auburn?
So he and I have a pretty complicated history.
I don't know that, by the way. I know nothing about y'all's history.
Yeah, I will say this. He's a good football coach. He's a good recruiter. What he did here was obviously humiliating for him. He paid for it. He was humiliated in the public sphere. He walked away from 17 point something $million. I mean, walked with nothing. Ole Miss didn't give him there was no parachute.
Nor should they.
Right. My point is that you're paying a price. I mean, I am a person who believes in second chances. He went to Liberty. He did a good job there. He has obviously a problem with Twitter. He can't get off of it, or X or whatever we call it now. I will tell you this, and I said this consistently, so I'll be consistent here. Last fall, when there was all the talk about Lane Kiffin to Auburn, I would talk to people at Auburn, people who cover Auburn, and I always told them, Lane Kiffin's not a fit at Auburn. Lane Kiffin is not going to come in and do all of the baby kissing and go to the fish fry and do all the Auburn family stuff. Lane's not going to do any of that. Lane's a good coach, but he's not going to do that stuff. Hugh Freeze will.
Yeah.
And that stuff matters at Auburn. They want that, for lack of a better word. Auburn people get pissed off at me when I say this, but it's hokey stuff. They like that family and all that stuff. And Lane will point out that he doesn't do the family thing, and he'll say why. If you ask him why, he'll tell you, well, because in a family, do you disown somebody because they're not any good?
Yeah.
You know, college football now, if you're not good, they process you out. They lower your NIL money. They move you on. That's not what you do in a family. In a family,
is Lane a perfect fit at Ole Miss, and will he be there a while? Entertaining from the outside, man. It's really entertaining on the outside.
Yeah, I think more and more as the time passes, there's a chance that he's here for a significant amount of time. I think there's a certain degree of wanderlust that he just has. And then obviously what happens is, because he's one of those guys that if you work for a click-based media outlet, and that's not a criticism, but if you work for an outlet that your salary is dependent upon clicks, well, you put Lane Kiffin at the top of the list.
Yeah.
And, like if you told me Texas A&M got off to a horrible start, for the record, I don't think they will, but let's say they did. Well, if I'm covering Texas A&M for 24/7, for On3, for ESPN, whose picture am I putting out front? If let's say Ole Miss is 5-1 at the turn, and A&M is 2-4, A&M loses at Miami, they lose in Arlington to Arkansas, they lose another game, it's a disaster, whatever. And it kind of gets leaking out that Jimbo's not going to survive it. Whose picture are you putting out front on day one?
Yeah, 100%.
Lane's. And so that's it's going, and the people here are going to run out of patience with it. And so there's a recipe where it gets a little volatile, but is he a fit? Yeah, he's a perfect fit, because he does a lot of he's made Ole Miss, I think, craves relevancy, and he makes them relevant. He makes them entertaining. People watch them. Either people love Lane Kiffin or they love to see Lane Kiffin lose. And so, yeah, he's a big brand. And so, yeah, I think he's a good fit. And the more he's here, the more that I think he realizes that Ole Miss people aren't. Look, is there a segment of the Ole Miss population that wants him to be more outgoing and more, talk about how great Ole Miss is and stuff? Sure. That's weird. But for the most part, they just want him to stay. They just want him to win and stay. And if he'll do that, they don't really care about his idiosyncrasies.
Hey, I know. I don't know about your time frame. I have two great Saban stories. You got time?
Yeah.
One involves Lane Kiffin. Clemson beats Alabama 44-16 national championship game. The second time they beat them in national championship. They beat them in national championship 2 out of 3 years, right? They had the great game out in Phoenix that comes down to a kickoff return and onside kick, and Bama wins. The next year in Tampa, Deshaun Watson throws a last-second touchdown pass to Renfro. I'm still on to tell the second story, too. Alabama beats them. They go back and forth first again. Bama beats them in the Sugar Bowl in the semifinals, in which I was convinced there's no way that's going to happen. And coaches all over the country were telling me, man, there's no way. Clemson's going to kill it. Bama's not very good. Anyway, Bama wins that one. And then in Santa Clara the following year, Clemson beats Bama 44-16, blows them out. Lane Kiffin is on Dan Patrick's show the next day. Dan Patrick says, what's it like in Tuscaloosa today? Now, Lane is at the time, he's at FAU, wherever, right?
Yeah.
And he says, I can tell you this, there's an 8 o'clock meeting, and you better be there by 7. And he said, he said, I guess you just have to be, that's just how it has to be, right? And Lane says, no. He goes, I'll tell you this, I coached, let me see, it's 15, and he got fired in the semifinals or left the semifinals before Sarkisian took over. He goes, I coached either 28 or 29 games in Tuscaloosa. He goes, I was happy for 28 days. The other 700 days, I was miserable. And Patrick again said, well, that's just how it has to be, right? And he goes, no. He goes, I worked for Pete Carroll. We won 2 national championships. I love every day working for him. Is it doesn't. There's more than one way to do it.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
again,
He has a lot of respect for Saban. He does the stuff that Saban does, but people do the Saban thing, but he's much more Pete Carroll than he is Nick Saban. Lane's not Nick Saban.
No, he respects him, but he also knows there's more than one way to do it. Right?
Sure, of course.
So I got this one for Saban too. So Burton Burns is one of my best friends in coaching. Burton coached with him running backs. He coached here with Tommy Bowden and coached with Coach Saban running backs. Had a couple of Heisman Trophy winners. Did a great job for him. After the Tampa win, after the Arizona win, 45-40, Alabama beats Clemson. They're in the locker room celebrating. They do the on-field thing, the confetti and all that, the Reese Davis interview, whatever it might be. Afterwards, they're in the locker room, they're smoking a cigar, whatever. Everybody's going crazy. Well, after all that clears out, there's about every game, there's a 10-minute window where the assistant coaches are meeting in the side room and Saban comes in, says something to them, and gets them ready for Sunday afternoon meetings or whatever it might be. He goes, man, they're celebrating national championships with cigars. He said Saban comes in the locker room and rips their ass.
After a title game.
After the national championship game. He said, men, I want to tell you something. It took a fluke kickoff return and an onside kick to beat a team that we were 2 touchdowns better than. You didn't have this football team prepared. That won't happen again. All right. Fast forward, and everybody's in shock. He goes, Monday morning or Wednesday morning, whatever, Thursday, when we get back, we're meeting, this won't happen again. All right. Clemson beats them in Tampa the next year on a last-second touchdown pass to Hunter Renfrow, right? 35-31, Clemson wins. After everything, locker room, Saban meets the media, the coaches, assistant coaches are in their little meeting room. They're expecting to get ripped again. Saban comes in and says, guys, I want to congratulate you. They were better than us. Your preparation and your game day stuff got us to where we had a chance at the end. It took they beat us on a last-second deal there. You had this football team prepared to win.
It's interesting. It's fascinating.
It's all about process.
Guy. Yeah, he's a fascinating guy.
It's all about process, right? You do as good as you can do, whether it's national championship, win or lose. It's the process and not the outcome.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
He's, like I said, he's an absolutely fascinating person to
no doubt.
follow. Hey, I really appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun. If I can ever repay you, please let me. I'll hop on.
You can. We're an hour behind, so we can tape it. But I'd love to have you on the radio show here. Our listeners love you. I get asked about you sometimes, and so I'd love to have you on soon.
Yeah, anytime, Mickey. I would love to do it.
Sounds good, buddy.
All right,
as usual. Good luck to you guys for having us.
Thank you. Bye. Our thanks to Mickey Plyler for his time on Hand Raise Guys. This will be the Oxford Exxon podcast. It'll be the 5th Oxford Exxon podcast of the week. Normally it's the Friday Oxford Exxon podcast, but we moved it up because of all the talk from Tallahassee, Big Ten, Pac-12. Moved it up today, so make sure we got it to you in a timely fashion. So we'll be back on Thursday with another edition of the Oxford Exxon podcast, and then next week with the full week of podcast as we enter week 2 of preseason camp for Ole Miss. And thanks for being with us. Appreciate it very much. Thanks to Comer. Thanks to Southern for sponsoring the show. Until next time, take care.